Rarely do I call something a game changer in my life. Today, I think it's one of those moments. If you're using Airtable and you're one of those aficionados of automation, you've probably heard about a thing called MCP servers, because this thing is genuinely unbelievable with what it can do if you set it up right. Today, we're going to take a look at how to set up your own MCP server using make.com and in the context of Airtable. Let's take a look. We're going to start things off with a very quick demo. We have an Airtable database in front of us. Technically, this is just setting up an MCP server to work with Airtable, right? We have a very simple convo record. Basically, I'm just going to be sending instructions through this little field. And this is just for demo purposes. I think in real life, we would be using this in a slightly different way. And I'm well aware that most people use this technology with like a chat bot, like Claude or something like that, and you're like integrating this thing. However, I think they are slightly missing the point. At least for an automation agency, we would never be using it like that. I think we would be using it in terms of like our automation geography or like topography. We would be using this in that sort of context. Right now we have 3 tasks, right? 1, 2, and 3. We also have the AI convo, and let's just say, remind me to call Nikki at 10 p.m. on Tuesday. Press send. Essentially, the system will go ahead and now create a task. And I know you're thinking this is nothing new. You know, with traditional automation, we can do this. You set up a scenario or you set up a Zap in Zapier, it will create a task for you. However, the whole point of MCP servers is that you give AI a set of basic capabilities. Creating a task, looking up tasks, deleting tasks, updating tasks. It's almost like you're giving AI the available API endpoints of a given service so that it can perform its own crude operations: create, read, update, delete. In this case, as you can see, it created the note. However, it did sort of miss the time, but that's okay. At least the date is okay. Let's go ahead and sneakily put in an extra task, something like text Nikki about trip, and let's just put a date in there and a status. I mean, we don't have to, but whatever. So now let's go ahead and send another request. Delete all tasks pertaining to Nikki and send. And a few seconds later, and here we go. One task just got deleted, and another one should be deleted right now as well. There we go. Perfect. All tasks pertaining to Nikki have now been deleted. This is a game changer because I just gave it some instructions. It decided in which sequence it should use the tools that are available to it. And that is literally the game changer, because when we set these sort of more complex automations up for some of our clients, we have to decide as automators which sequence I have to search for all the records first. I have to see if I can find the word Nikki in there somewhere. And that, just that in its own right, is very complicated. Finding Nikki in the tasks. Is it in the name? Is it in the notes of the tasks? Not only does it find those tasks, it actually then, because the user said delete, it goes ahead and uses the delete capability that we've given it. Awesome stuff. Now, let's go ahead and see how to set this whole thing up. At this point of the video, I would like to thank absolutely every single one of you who's subscribed to our channel, who's watching us and supporting us. Now, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to ring that bell icon. Back to the video. To begin with, we need to set up our trigger. Essentially, we have one automation over here that basically sends the command to our AI agent. In this case, we are using ChatGPT 01, and there's a few models, ChatGPT models that can act, that support MCP, but in this case, we're just using 01. But we need to send a request to it, right? Basically, this command, delete any tasks for Vicky, for instance, right? So we need to set up our trigger. Let's go ahead and do that. Create a new scenario. And by the way, there is a link in the description below for a 1-month pro account for make.com with 10,000 operations. So go ahead and check that out. If you're new to Make, create a new scenario, custom webhook, grab this webhook, copy to clipboard, and let's jump into Airtable. Automations, if you've been watching the channel, you know that I usually trigger automation is in exactly the same way. So when a record matches conditions is our trigger, which table AI convo when send is checked. We run the same good old script, which looks like this. Just make sure that you replace this webhook with yours. Over here in the record ID, in the inputs, just add a new input variable, name it record ID, just like I have done here, and just add your value of the record ID just by pressing this blue button and use this Airtable record ID variable. That's it. You've sorted out the trigger. Don't forget to turn it on because I usually do. That's it in terms of the trigger. Now our data is going to be landing inside of Airtable. So the next step is to, create a get. So we want to fetch that record. The next step from there is now setting up our agent. At this point, before we start setting up our agent, we need to jump back into Make. And we need to go over here into our profile and jump into API MCP access and press add token. From here, just choose MCP token and press add. Once you do that, you will get a URL that looks something like this, right? Make sure that you copy it as soon as you see it. I've copied mine and now you can't see some of the variables in there, but anyway, bottom line is copy it. As soon as you get it, copy it. Now, let's take a look back at our scenario. Let's open up this create a model response. This is not a chat completion. This is something completely different. Create a model response. Choose a model. I've chosen a 1. Prompt type text prompt. I have my prompt, essentially request message, and context from previous response. If there is no context, just print NA. And the mission is based on the provided request message, blah, 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 and always use the ID of record. Let's scroll a little bit lower to this part. Here, first and foremost, you need to grab that URL that you've just copied and paste it into the server URL. The part that is really important is in that URL that you're going to be fetching. There's going to be like a little part over here, this bit. Now you need to copy this bit as you've just copied and put it in here in the header. So create a new header, call it authorization, just like I've done now. Bearer, put a space, and then paste in that key, essentially. Once you've done that, the next thing is to basically jump in and do something like this. You need to be left with this particular URL, and then we put in question mark. And here what I'm doing is I'm essentially limiting the tools that this MCP server can handle. How do I get my tools, you might ask? They're all separated by an ampersand, right? And I need to provide a scenario ID. How do I fetch the scenario ID? Super simple. It's over here at the URL of each tool that I'm creating. As soon as you get this down, you should be golden. Just add all of the scenarios that you want the MCP server to, the agent rather, to have access to. That's basically it. Everything else is, I think, standard. This is not standard, the include. So I've just selected all. Everything else, well, reasoning effort is medium, whatever. Play around with some of these settings to your heart's content. But that's how I'm set up at the moment. And press save. Now at this point, I'm using an iterator where I'm iterating through the output and I'm looking for the type called message. Once I find it, I just basically map the text from that message, which is content, text, and this is what I'm mapping in. This particular value into this text aggregator. And you see where I'm going with this. I'm basically mapping the response back into my Airtable record, my convo record, just so that I know that, the whole thing is finished. Now that we've set up the process of basically calling on the AI agent to perform certain tasks, now let's talk a little bit about how to give it those abilities. And it couldn't be simpler. So as you saw here, I have a new scenario. Only difference to a traditional scenario that we might be triggering on a schedule or instantly if it's like a webhook, it's the fact that we're triggering this on demand. So go ahead and click on this thing, make sure that it's set to on demand, and you're good to go. There's a few interesting bits to this. First of all, we basically have scenario inputs, and occasionally they are useful. In this particular instance, what is this? This is list tasks, right? So this capability is to list tasks. And as you can see, I'm performing a arbitrary search of my table of tasks. I am putting everything into an array, literally selected all the fields, and I'm mapping it into my scenario output. This output is then shared with the agent, and the agent determines, what to do with this output. How do we set up inputs and outputs, you might ask? Because sometimes we have things like delete a task, right? We saw that in action. Delete a task. This is how I've set this up. The module is delete a record. And you can see here that I've got delete record and task record ID is my input. How do I set my inputs and outputs, you might ask? Over here, down here. I have my scenario inputs and I have my scenario outputs. As easy as just going ahead and creating a new output variable. So in my case, it was task record ID. Decide what the type is, whether that is a number or a Boolean or a date or a text. So in this case, I think task record ID is just a simple text, and just map that into the task record ID. From there, I have my output where I'm basically mapping in all of the available fields that I could fetch. For instance, the today's date. So that was another interesting thing. While I was testing this, I noticed that the agent couldn't tell what date it was. I went ahead, created a new scenario, set the variable, called it now, named the tool today's date, and in my return output, let's go ahead and check that out. Scenario outputs, you can see I've got no inputs. Right? I don't need them. There is nothing to input. The input actually comes via this function, the make function that gives you the date and time of right now. But I did need a date and time output so that I can share that with the agent. So scenario output, let's check this out. Now, date, time, and I'm also adding descriptions. And descriptions in those scenario outputs are super important because they are shared with the agent. When an agent receives an output, it also sees the description. What is this field that I'm getting data into? So that it can basically make better decisions for us. That's basically it. It works like freaking magic. I know that this is probably not the most easiest thing to digest, but it works like a charm. Now, I have a feeling there's so many cool things that we can do with this. And I think this is just the start of something just really insane for the automation industry. I have a lot of ideas on how we can expand this use of MCP servers. I think there's a few more videos coming on this topic. Until then, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.